Okay. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Germinator. My name is Dr. Alon Eisenstein, and I'm the host for this mostly bi-weekly online guest speaker fireside chat-esque speaker series. I am an assistant professor of teaching in technology entrepreneurship at the School of Engineering at UBC Okanagan campus. Today I have the pleasure of having Ketan Kaushish. Before introducing Ketan, I do want to respectfully acknowledge that I'm joining or hosting this session from the Syilx Okanagan Nation's unceded traditional and ancestral and currently occupied territory. And as I usually take the practice to try and connect the way I acknowledge the land to the topic of the conversation, and we are talking about agriculture, we are talking about food and the relationship with the earth. And so I thought I'd share the word that is used for land in the language of the Syilx, which is in Syilxchin. The word for land is timhulauch, which I've learned from taking a few language courses in Syilxchin, and also hearing from elders and knowledge keepers the meaning of the word timhulauch, which is really interesting and very topical to what we're going to talk about in today's session. The word timhulauch has the beginning, which is timhu, which is a different version of the word tmich, which is essentially the life of everything. It's like the energy of life, energy of creation. And so when it's used in the word timhulauch, land, it's actually implied that it's being regenerated. And so the land is literally understood to be the thing that regenerates the force of life. And I find that very beautiful, but also very instructive. And so if you truly value and believe that the land is the thing that regenerates the forces of life, you have to treat it with care. You have to treat it as a sacred thing, which of course indigenous nations have done from time immemorial. And from a Western perspective, we kind of forgot that. And I guess now we're seeing the results of what that leads us to in our current climate crisis. And also, also noting how much of the wisdom is carried in the language, in the different languages of indigenous nations across the world. And that it's worth retaining these languages so we don't lose the wisdom that's embedded within them. And so with that, and on that topic, I'm gonna quickly introduce Ketan Kaushish. We've met way back when I was in Toronto, and this is gonna be 20, I'm gonna say about 2018-ish, roughly. So what is it now? About 7 years ago, maybe 6, 7 years ago. At the time, he was a new co-founder with Avi, and together they created a company called Ukko Agro. And I hope we're going to chat a bit about that experience. And it's really part of Ketan's, I would say at this point, lifelong journey in agriculture and making the world better through better agriculture, through better agri-tech. And so I'm super excited to have him with me. And also, again, part of his experience is very topical and relevant for me as an educator in the School of Engineering, coming from a background with a bachelor's in engineering and electrical and electronics engineering, and later on an MBA from Cornell. So extremely knowledgeable, educated, and most importantly, experienced in the field. So Ketan, really great to have you with me today. How are you today?
I'm good. Great to be here. And Alon, great to see you after, or great to interact with you after a few years. I think the first time we met was 2018. I remembered. We founded Ukko in end of 2016, and then like any startup, it took us a year to promote and come to at that time the University of Toronto office. I think that's where we met.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe we'll kind of jump back to, maybe back and forth in time. But maybe kind of setting the stage. I mean, you're an engineer in education originally, um, and I think agriculture has done a lot of things over the years. I mean, there's lots of transformation, and so maybe kind of set the stage for me, for us. Um, as an engineering student, did you have any connection with agriculture? Was that something that you already came with, or is that something that you learned along the way? Or like, what were you thinking? How did you end up in agriculture?
It's fascinating. I mean, I think as far as I remember, my journey with agriculture goes way before engineering, and it comes from the fact that my father's actually worked in the same sector for 50 years now, and not as a farmer. I actually just a bit of a side story. I grew up in India, in Delhi, and my father is actually a trained agronomist, and he worked with uh, three of the largest agrochem companies in the world back in India. So my early exposure to agriculture was nothing to do with agriculture, but he would get these marketing goodies, like a thermos or a bag or something else which had branding of the agriculture company. So funny story is, till when I was 14 or 15, the only thing I knew was these agriculture companies because I would see their bags and their marketing stuff in our house all the time. And I would say, great, this is great. You get a lot of free goodies. I guess, this is a great sector to work in. I guess that was my first exposure. But I never had the intention of actually going into agriculture. Engineering was a cool thing, when I was in my late teens, and that's what I wanted to do. That's what a lot of my friends were doing. So I went and did it. I did coding for a couple of years, and although I liked it, I realized I'm not the best at it. And then I did a master's in foreign trade from a school in India, and I guess that's when I first broke into agriculture as a commodities trader. So it was agriculture, but not. I mean, I was predominantly working on procuring commodities like coffee, cocoa for one of the largest companies in the world, and then taking positions on commodity exchanges like ICE, which is in Chicago, or like Life, LIFFE, which is based in London. So I would take positions. So that was my first real exposure of agriculture. Never stepped, I guess, within that stint. Uh, Actually, I stepped my foot on quite a few coffee farms in Vietnam. I spent a year in Vietnam working with coffee farmers. Loved that aspect. And then when I did my MBA from the US, I had the opportunity to either stay in New York or move to Switzerland and work with one of the largest crop input companies. And I went there, and I guess that's where the journey started. And really, for me, agriculture is really big when you think about it. I mean, we think about agriculture; it's a very big but a small sector in the sense it's an oligopoly. There are very few companies that are leading agriculture, but from farm to fork is how you call it. Uh, that's where my journey started, and I think my journey, what's gotten me interested in agriculture, is more on the sustainability side than the very, very conventional agriculture. I started off in the conventional, but I guess I made a call last year that I would like to dedicate my rest of my career towards climate change in agriculture, and that's what I'm heavily focused on these days.
Okay, I'm definitely coming back to the sustainability and the climate part. But maybe I'll kind of do a last little poke. Because that transition that you just talked about from engineering school to commodity trading, um, did that come after your master's in
That did, but I
okay.
that did, but I've actually when I was working, with these large companies, there were actually quite a few engineers, especially engineers who were good on the math side, right? So
Yeah.
quant focus engineers, and uh, I've seen that. And although I haven't used engineering in directly in what I do, but I'm actually involved more and more into data science now, and I understand stats and I understand maths, right? So I think not just agriculture, but whatever you do these days, if you're not using data and if you're not using stats, you're not really doing, you're
Yeah.
not really, you may not be doing the business in the best possible way, right? So I think engineering as a field, as a sector, is starting to get embedded into everything, or in all sectors, especially when it comes to database decision making.
Yeah. So, okay, so now kind of connecting the lines between your engineering training, dealing with data. Um, so Ukko Agro, like you said, started about 2016. So it's coming down to about 10 years ago. And I think you had about 10 years before that trading. So you now have essentially 2 decades worth of professional experience in agriculture. And I think again from the at the, let's say, at the individual level, right, as a private person or professional not in the agriculture business, I think this whole idea of data, especially with algorithm prediction models, machine learning, and all that. I mean, these things kind of blew the lid off. I mean, for most people, ChatGPT was the first thing that got a wake-up call. I think machine learning was already pretty getting more attention. I remember back at the University of Toronto when we were at the Impact Center, we had a big event and we had Jeffrey Hinton come in as a speaker. So I think at that point, it was kind of already known that machine learning is a thing. Um, so that was already old news for the people in the industry. So maybe from your perspective, seeing this 20 years in the making, from your vested point of view, um, how long? I mean, I think people think of agriculture, this mythical, classical, where do stuff grow? And people think of the farmer with hand tools and maybe a tractor as the most sophisticated thing. But realistically, agri-tech is not new thing. Um, so how long ago from your experience has data been a thing in agriculture? And what has been like the major earth moving shifts in the last kind of 2 decades that you've probably participated in your case?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm gonna differentiate between data collection and data analysis, because those two are different things, right? You can collect a lot of data and not do anything with it, and that's just good for the notebook. So in essence, agriculture has always been data focused, right? What I mean by that is, if you talk to a farmer and you ask how did he, and a lot of farms in North America are multi-generational farms, right? So it's not just,
Mm.
so there are new farmers coming in as well, but in a lot of cases it's been passed over generations. So if you ask someone, how did your grandfather, if you ask a 30-year-old saying, how did your grandfather record anything, what was happening on the farm, what were they applying? And the answer is yes, right? So I think data in agriculture has been important for as long as I can remember.
Mm.
As long as it's notebook and paper, people will taking notebooks and taking the notes down. So what does that mean in actual terms? Is, hey, I applied fertilizer and I saw certain yield. Let me take a note of how many tons of fertilizer am I applying on a per acre basis, and what yield did I get? I'm going to put it on a notebook. And next year, when I go back to the farm, I'll actually have that notebook. I will see what I did. I'll take the note again, and I'll have those notes over multiple years, right? So 10 years down the line, and I can actually go back and see what all happened, and then I will take a judgment call accordingly. So I think the shift in agriculture happened, I would say, between the till about early 2000s. A lot of the record keeping was happening, but with the dot-com era, what happened was that, like a lot of other industries, instead of capturing data on a notebook, you could now go on a website, or maybe simple form or Google Excel, and you can start putting data in there. So I think that was the first form of digitization that started happening. Uh, there's been a lot of innovation on the machinery side. and that's also because it's much more organized. I mean, John Deere is probably one of the biggest companies in agriculture. So John Deere took that leap of saying that, we're going to use data, especially with auto steer. So a lot of people think about Tesla when it comes to self-drive, but what a lot of people wouldn't know was John Deere is actually one of the pioneers in this. Of course, the level of complication is less when you're driving on a street and you have to have a number of cameras and analysis that happens on the edge. It happens on a tractor as well, but of course, it's not that complicated. You're basically driving on a field and you're hoping they're not people walking on a field. But when you think about auto steer, it's which is you put a path for a tractor and the tractor will follow that path and do whatever action is required. That actually started happening in early 2000s, right? So it's very, very early on, but the when you take when you so that was a second wave where a lot of the innovation was coming on machinery side. But I think if you talk about ML and AI, that auto steer is a part of ML AI. But if you think about ML and AI with regards to how you apply things on a field, that started happening more in 2000, post 2010 or 12, and that's where what happened. I mean, like a lot of other industries, you need money, or startups need money to do these things. So what happened I think 2013, there was one big exit of a company called Climate Corp, founded by a couple of Google engineers in the Bay Area, got sold for $1 billion. Bayer bought it, and then everyone was like, "Oh, you can. This is a sector that we haven't looked into. So let's figure out. And there's all this data sitting. Let's start building ML or AI tools to see what we can do with this data, right?" And that's when I think that exit in 2013 is what really propelled, I would say, ag tech. A lot of companies came in, and I think a lot of focus was on digitizing these records to start with. So a lot of farm management systems came in, but along the path, what got more and more intriguing was what do you do with this data? So there were a number of companies that came up which were doing either analysis of what's happening somewhere, or predictive analysis, or even prescriptive analysis as well, right? So I think that kind of gives you the overall journey. And since 2013, things have really, really picked up in agriculture over the past 12 years.
Yeah. And it sounds like to some extent the term agri-tech is probably now mostly associated with the realization of the software, the data, the algorithm, and less so about the hardware, which, as you said, was pretty there already. Talks about how we perceive technology as software based first and hardware second. So I mean Ukko Agro that you co-founded and kind of went through all this past several years with, I guess for those who are not familiar, is really about a predictive algorithm. If you have the data based on the weather, based on the status of the field, we can predict what you should be doing in the next, say, I don't know, 3-5 days, maybe. I don't know if you stretch it beyond a week or so. And I teach entrepreneurship, and I always tell students, what problem are you solving? And they say, well, we're trying to save costs. Say, well, great, that's everybody's problem, right? What's the underlying problem? And so, in the case of farmers, of course, cost is a thing, right? But what are some of the underlying problems that exist in agriculture, that are really desperate for technological solutions that are maybe not mature yet, or maybe are people a bit on the fence? Because again, if you look at the innovation adoption curve, they're more on the progressive, conservative, hesitancy side of the scale, and not on the leading edge of adopting, the newest, shiniest new things. Where's the opportunity? What are the things that people are losing sleep over, in agriculture, that makes it harder for them?
Yeah, and I think I would say there's no silver bullet to this, Alan, because if you look at agriculture in sub-Saharan Africa is very different from agriculture in the US or Brazil, right? I mean, if you think about agriculture, before I answer that, I mean, agriculture, if you look at the development life cycle of a farm. You can have subsistence farming, which is, hey, I'll farm something, I harvest it, and I'm going to feed my family. If I don't harvest it, my family goes, I can't feed my family. Versus you have these mega farms in Brazil, which are a million or half a million to a million acres, right? So these farms are like, they have multiple cities within a farm. And these are completely industrialized operations. These are corporate-owned farms. So, even when you think about agriculture, what a farm means in Brazil is very different from what a farm means in sub-Saharan Africa, right? So I think the needs would be very, very different as well. If you look at these, I would say, developing countries or even underdeveloped countries, they're, what keeps them awake at night is, hey, how can I not lose my crop to climate variations, because they don't have a lot of money at disposal, right? So, for example, if you think about an insect attack, insecticides or fungicides or pesticides, they're very expensive. If you ask a farmer, do you want to use pesticide? If you don't have to, the farmer will say, no way, I want to use it because they're very, very expensive. If I can produce my food without it, I would absolutely do it because I'm going to make much more money. So, for someone who's in Africa, the biggest issue is what happen. What do I do if a drought happens? Climate variations are, I would say, one of their biggest issues, and climate variations are big issues in Brazil as well. But their livelihood depends on that, right? A drought can mean that they can't feed their family. So for them, getting that harvest, increasing their yield is the biggest issue. If you think about someone in Brazil, or if you think about an industrialized farm, of course, climate is an issue as well. I mean, if a drought happens, there's not much you can do. But there, industrialized farms are run like they run like machines, right? What that means is they have very strict schedules to say, okay, first week of July, I'm going to spray all my fungicides. So it's a very tight knit operations. So for them, labor shortage or time is the biggest issue. There have been talks in the US about, with the new administration, the way they're thinking about asking some of the immigrants to leave the country. There's been a huge issue with farming in the US saying, hey, if our workers actually are forced to leave the US, then how do we manage our farms? And that's because these are industrialized farms. And if you don't have labor on the ground, you can't run the farm, and you're going to decrease your yield. So I think depending on where you are in the world, your challenges are very different. But one common challenge, and I'm going to highlight it, is climate change. I would say is the biggest challenge that everyone is seeing, no matter what your size is, no matter where in the world you are.
Yeah, really, what matters would be what's at stake. Like if you fall prey to, not fall prey, but yeah, if you're victim to an extreme climate event, then I guess what's at stake? Your family or the company goes bust and you fire everybody and whatnot. No, and I appreciate that. And of course, I guess that's kind of the challenge, right? The fact that different scales have different ability to deal with that. And it sounds to me again that when you're alluding to, farmers don't want to spend money if they don't have to, right? But then it also sounds like, again, because of the historical legacy of a generational memory and pattern of behavior, it sounds like, again, there's a lot of risk in not repeating what you've done before. So you probably don't want to take too much variation from previous years because that puts you at risk and you don't know if your decision will or will not work. And then again, by the time you know if it's working or not, it might be too late, right? So there's a lot of risk there. So is it safe to say that the biggest issue is how do you manage the risk of uncertainty that is climate with the risk of uncertainty that your decisions might lead you, bad?
It is true, Alan, and in terms of, if you look at the risk and reward, right? At Ukko, we built a predictive analytics tool uh, where we could predict a disease a few days out, and we could tell a farmer, or we could predict the possibility of a disease, and we could tell the farmer, should you take an action or not. Now, if you think of a farmer in kind of the risk to reward ratio, right? So in terms of numbers, let's say, a fungicide spray will cost you $20 an acre, $25 an acre. But what's at stake, the value of that crop might be $300-400 an acre, might be $1,000 an acre. So if you look at the risk to reward, I think that's what is, back to what you're saying, is about, hey, I'll save $20, but what if you guys are wrong? What if I actually get the disease and I lose my crop worth $700? So there's actually a huge risk that farmers have to take, if you tell them to do something which is very, very different. And that is why it is a big mindset shift that has to happen. And I think uh, the farmer somewhere, the risk needs to be adjusted, right? Which is, I think, expecting a farmer to say, you take all the risk and you try this thing out, and you pay for it, by the way. I'm not giving this to you for free. And then I don't guarantee if anything wrong happens that there's insurance that will cover stuff. So I think to make sure that farmers are taking this risk, I think somewhere there needs to be support from the government, from the local municipality or anyone else to say, hey, if you want to adopt technologies that would help you be more sustainable, then if here's a pool of money that we can give you for trying this out, or here's how we can help you reduce the risk. So you're right. I mean, I think farmers take a lot of risk, but they need some support.
So in your experience, again, and again, we'll probably transition away from Ukko because, as you mentioned before we started, that you're no longer with Ukko for the last, I guess, close to a year now. What have you learned? Like, I mean, and again, I'm kind of thinking, in my role as an educator with engineers, engineers tend to focus on the technology. The problem is objects oriented, not human oriented. When we talk about risk, there's, again, you put a number on something, say, well, here's a number, and therefore that's the risk factor number. Now we need to just make a decision on it. But again, usually if it's not your farm, it's not your family, it's not your feeding obligation, you can talk risk till you're blue in the face. It's not your decision to make and own that risk, right? You're just getting the data. What have you learned about dealing with people, right? The way, like how do you help people overcome a version of risk, or even helping them manage risk in a good way? Like what have you learned that works? What do you learn about yourself being able to do that? I'm assuming successfully, because Ukko Agro is still in business, so you're probably doing
Yeah,
something.
yeah. I think when it comes to, I wouldn't say convincing someone to use something, but first let's assume that if you've identified a real problem, right? I mean, there are two ways to selling something. One is, I've built this, now let me go see who will buy this. Or you say, I'm going to talk to 100 people, I'm going to understand what the problem is, and then I'm going to build something that can solve the problem, right? So let's say, we go the second route. I think even in that case, even if you have the best product that solves, that hits the nail on the head and solves the problem, trust is what I've learned is the biggest issue, and it takes a lot of time to build trust, and it's very easy to break trust, right? Especially if you're a new company, uh, especially if you're a small company, right? Trust issues can be, hey, you're a 5 people company. How do I trust you? How do I trust that you'll even be there a year down the line? How can it, you don't have 500 people on a phone call that I can call and, someone will be on the line and help me out. How do I, if I use this, of course it's going to break down. Of course there'll be issues. How do I make sure that someone will actually jump on a call with me at 10 in the night and help me out, right? So I think it's a lot about that, especially when you start a company. It's a lot about investing your own time, building those relationships with your client and being with them anytime. And no matter how much money you can spend on marketing, what I can tell you is 5 custom testimonials where they're ready to write something good about you or do an interview with you. Nothing beats that. Uh, I still remember the first client we got when I was still at Ukko. We arranged this farmer meeting in Prince Edward Island, and uh, three farmers signed up, and I was like, "Hey, should I hop on a flight and go there?" And we always said, "Okay, always show up." That's the thing, right? Even if there's one farmer. I showed up, Alan. There was one farmer. He was so happy that I came all the way from Toronto just to meet him. Signed him up. He was the first guy. He loved it, and then he was singing praises about the platform. And then within 1 year, or you can say within one selling cycle, because you only grow one crop in a year, we went from one farmer to 30 farmers in the next year, right? And that was just because we showed up,
Yeah.
we did the right thing, and we supported that farmer in whatever way we could. Did we have the best product? No. We probably had a product with a lot of glitches, but we made sure that a client had a good experience, and that's what this led into. So I think it's all about showing up and then making sure somehow that you're able to deliver the value to your customer.
Yeah, I love that. I want to take a quick pause and see, because I see we have Jennifer on the call. I don't know if Jennifer, you have a question for Ketan to ask about his experience. I don't know if you want to jump in with any question or not.
Hi, guys.
Hi, Jennifer.
Hi.
I'm sitting here at UBC Okanagan campus in Enrollment Services, enjoying this conversation and learning tons. I wasn't too sure what the topic was about. We have a small farm, and we, on a very small scale, have a mixed orchard and do garlic. We used to do cows, but with climate change, we couldn't support them anymore on 6 acres without having to bring in hay. Anyhow, I was interested in hearing about the influence of AI and all the apps and the pilots that are happening with farmers no longer having to like follow a set schedule of this is when I'm going to spray this pesticide and this is when I'm going to spray the copper on my peaches. And it's some sort of weather sensor that comes in with satellites, and it feeds and tells you exactly this is what's happening, this is what's going to be coming, this is the weather event, this is what you should prepare for. So I had thought for some reason it was along that line, but everything you've been talking about, Ketan, has been fascinating because I am not aware of the industrialized side of things. And there's always pieces that you can take as a small farmer and apply. So I don't know if any have any questions. I'm just very happy to be listening and enjoying this conversation. That's it.
Sorry, Jennifer. Good to meet you. Was there a question there that I can answer, or
No,
no? Okay.
I had no idea what was coming. I'm just enjoying your conversation and learning about your world.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining.
And I don't know if you're familiar with the Okanagan and our geographic location where UBC Okanagan is situated. We are embedded in farmland, right? The Okanagan is very much a farm-based community, and even though I guess the community has grown, exploded in the last 1, 2, 3 decades. I guess I was talking to one of our city councilors the other day, whether we grew by 100% or by 50% in the last 5 to 10 years, but it's growing amazingly. And I think what I really like about being in the Okanagan is that we have the agricultural land reserve. So legally you can't just plow over and build and develop agricultural land. Don't say willy-nilly, but there are legal barriers to just demolish every piece of farmland around, and I think that is definitely proving a strength of resiliency for the community. Otherwise, I think we would have long seen all of it gone for more $2 million houses for wealthy people retiring in this area, and we would have very little farmland to speak of. So it's very fortunate to have, I mean, Jennifer's on the call, but there's so many people who have a small scale farm, right? So that makes this area very interesting to be in. And interestingly, I think, again, there's an interesting relationship because you talked about sub-Sahara scale versus Brazil scale. I think here in the Okanagan, I would probably say we're somewhere in between, probably closer to the sub-Sahara scale on some levels. But there are a few, I wouldn't call them industrial, but they're definitely larger scale orchards, vineyards, and whatnot. And I know that you've experienced, I mean, kind of watching some videos about your experience. You have experience with, I guess, with wheat, with lentils. I don't know if you had any experience with things that are a bit more on the, let's say, luxury style, like grapes, like vineyards. I guess even the stone fruits, like the peaches and the apricots. I mean, from your perspective, your experience, the way you think of data and all that, I mean, how much of it is some of it is definitely translational, right? You can translate your experience with, again, wheat fields, barley fields, but then orchards are different, right? You can't just run a big tractor combine over an orchard. And we have an interesting group here that's trying to develop a robot that can actually run on the hillside because it's very hilly, very bumpy. So what do you think? What do you know that your experience can be like? How much of it is translatable from different crops? Topography, the presence of trees versus other structures.
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of know of that realm from an ag tech standpoint, but I'm much more involved in that realm from a carbon standpoint. So I'll kind of touch upon what I've learned about what you call as a tree of food crops or high value crops. Vineyards would be high value crop, an almond tree would be a tree and food crop, as an example, right? And I guess the uh, kind of the place where you find the most production of this in North America is California, right? So if you look at where and we were talking about the requirement of labor in agriculture, right? Labor becomes extremely important in high value crops. For example, in case of vineyards or olives or these high value crops, because you're right. I mean, you can't just take a machine, you can't just take a combine and run it through a vineyard for harvesting. So far, it's mostly been done through hand picking, right? And that's where labor comes in. So if you look at what's happening, for example, in California, uh, there are quite a few companies that are coming up with that are developing robots or machines, and they're usually starting with a very, very specific crop. To say, and a lot of that focus, I mean, in California has been Napa Valley because that's where the largest vineyards are, and they have the money to spend on these robots or almonds or pistachios. That's been the other focus that we've seen in North America. And I mean, if you look at the valuations or the fundraising, etc., I would say other than biologicals, which is a completely different ball game, some of these machinery companies have been very, very successful because they've been able to reduce the amount of labor that is required on a 200-acre almond farm. And believe me, a 200-acre almond farm, the amount of work that is required on that would probably equal into a few thousand acres of a corn and soy farm because they're much more automated, whereas you need much more uh, kind of human capital or human help on the ground to help you with picking, right? So that's what I'm seeing, and I think the other thing is on the carbon side, what we're seeing is if you look at the supply chains, if you look at the supply chain of a corn and soy, that supply chain is what I would say is very heterogeneous in the sense that uh, it's not that I grow corn or soy in the Midwest or in Ontario and I would just go sell it, to an end buyer. No, there'll be a company that will come in that will aggregate everything and then they will then sell it for animal feed or processing, right? Whereas if you look at the high value crops, the peaches, or if you look at bananas, or you look at vineyards, right? Their supply chain is very homogeneous. I grow this, I might process it, or someone else might process it, and that batch actually goes to a buyer. So the supply chain is much more traceable. So what we're seeing from a carbon standpoint is uh, the higher value crops are also very, very interesting in understanding the carbon impact. In fact, I've been working very closely with a company called Carbon Space. They're based out of Ireland, and what they're doing is they're essentially doing this, where they're saying, okay, we can actually understand your carbon impact of growing this crop, and we can tell you how much uh, how much carbon are you sequestering or how much carbon are you emitting, and then uh, what the high value crops are doing very well that some of these broad acre crops are not doing is they're able to monetize these things, whether they label their produce as low organic, or they can sell these carbon credits on the on a carbon credit exchange. I mean, that's where I see a big difference. So in terms of machinery, there's much more machinery going into these, but also they have a much more stronger sustainability focus as compared to the broad acre crops.
So it sounds like the challenge for the high value crops is still mostly stuck in hardware, whereas the hardware challenge for large scale flat fields of wheat and barley is that's the hardware is the easier part, and now you can figure out the predictability in the future decision making, whereas in a high value we haven't figured out the mechanics of getting between the leaves, between the branches and all that. So it'll be interesting to see.
And also because each crop is very different. I mean, the way you
Yeah.
pick olives is not the way you pick mushrooms, or it's not the way you pick grapes. They're very, very different, right? And the way the robot has to move and do things is very, very different.
Yeah.
The other thing is also, if you look at the corn and soy, there are clear leaders on who operates and owns the machinery, right? It's John Deere, it's CNH. That's an oligopoly, right? So for a new entrant to come in and compete with John Deere, it is very, very difficult. But if you look at the high value market, that's where not you don't see John Deere having a lion's share there, right? So there's still more open space for someone to come and try to build something and experiment and make a space. That thing is just not. I would say that thing is much more difficult to do
Yeah.
in areas where you have John Deere or the likes.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Before we run out of time, when I was chatting with you about or changing messages on what we should call this conversation, you said, how do we go from carbon emitter to carbon sink for agriculture? And I think you kind of started to alluded to that with the carbon pricing of high value crops. So how do we turn the agriculture on its head and make it a net sink then as opposed to a net emitter?
I mean, I would say the first step to that is understanding what your impact is today, right? If you go to a farm in Saskatchewan and you ask them, what is your net carbon impact? Can you show me what that impact is? I don't know how many farmers know about this, right? So I think, there's a concept of baselining, which is to say, let's say that I say that in year 1970, I emitted 50 tons of carbon. That's my baseline, and I want to understand how have my carbon emissions been over the years. The challenge is not many farmers know their baseline. They don't even know what they're emitting today. And the second challenge is, Alan, that a lot of the techniques that have come today to understand what the carbon emissions are, they're not they don't paint the complete picture, right? So, for example, in agriculture, one of the biggest drivers have been soil sampling. I'm a huge proponent of, I support and I promote soil health, but is measuring your soil organic carbon the best way to understand your carbon impact? That's one small pool. I mean, if you have a mix of forest and you have a mix of other kinds of vegetation, and you have livestock, and you are growing crops, soil organic carbon only represents one piece of it. It doesn't represent anything else, right? So I think the first thing is, do you have an intent to understand your baseline? And the second thing is, are you using the right tools to be able to measure what your carbon impact is, not just for your soil, but for your entire farm, right?
So,
I think those two are the starting points for me.
without downplaying the importance of knowing what to measure, because if we don't know what we're measuring, we can't say it's getting better. But if I were to kind of compare this, say, well, you know, we want to see what the carbon emission associated with construction, right? So we can still talk about choosing different construction material, but if you're growing crops, I mean, if you need to grow wheat, you can't grow non-wheat and call it wheat. You're still going to grow wheat. So where's the opportunity? So let's say we know what it is, we're measuring it well. Where from the industrial component of it is the opportunity to make decisions, not to say we know where the decision should be made, but what is it even possible?
Yeah. So I'll give you examples, right? So for example, you take a farm, don't think of a field. So, let's take a farm. And, we've heard about regenerative practices, right? So there are multiple ways to think about it, which is, hey, whenever I apply nitrogen, that's if I don't apply it at the right time, that might release nitrous oxide emissions. Or if I till, I'm releasing some carbon that is stored in the soil back into the atmosphere. Or if I have even if I have a 8-acre farm, should I farm all 8 acres? What if I keep 2 or 3 acres of forest land? What impact would it have on on my total soil, on my total emissions, on my total sequestration? And then each crop has its own sequestration. So for example, if you grow corn on a per hectare basis, which is roughly about 2 acres, has a carbon footprint of 600 tons, uh, uh, right? And then, but if you look at, for example, if you look at beans, that has 200. So knowing these things will help you understand, which crops have a higher carbon footprint versus which crops don't. And I think what I'm very, very excited about is there are a lot of new science coming out for you to help measure how much your overall impact is, and not just your soil organic carbon. So, for example, I've been deeply involved in this I wouldn't say new way of measurement, but an emerging way of measurement called flux measurements. So flux measurements can basically understand how much carbon is being exchanged within the atmosphere, within the environment itself. So you don't need to do any kind of digging. And that can actually tell you that, hey, this is your total piece of land. In a total piece of land, this is how much carbon you've exchanged in the past month or the past year, right?
Mm-hmm.
Things like these can help you understand that not just for a field, but for my entire farm, what is my carbon impact? And then let's say if you make changes, right? Let's say we say, okay, next year I'm going to increase my tree cover. I'm going to plant a different crop. I'm not going to, do any kind of tilling. Now help me understand what is my carbon footprint. Now the next year, the same technology can tell you, oh, by the way, you actually sequestered more carbon or you emitted less carbon, right? So there are tools that are coming out there. This is all from deep science that can help you understand what your carbon footprint is today.
So if I can paraphrase and summarize, what I'm hearing from you is we need to measure better so we can make better decisions on how to balance what we're trying to grow at what scale and what is it coming, at what expense it is. And so again, it's the question of, if I need to earn a living, if I again, at some point, if I'm being there's price on carbon emission, which I guess we should all collectively, encourage people to reduce as much as possible. Can we create a self-sustaining, balanced, or carbon neutral farm that balances the place that's being actually farmed versus the areas that are not being farmed. So on balance, it's kind of net zero. So you're not actually adding to the global problem. Is that kind of roughly what I'm hearing from you?
Exactly, and I think regulations will also enforce that. I think if you look at regulations of what's happening in Europe, so I don't know if you know about the EUDR regulation, EU deforestation regulation. What that basically means is the CPG companies in Europe actually cannot procure any any commodity from deforested land, and that's huge for palm oil, right? So
Yes.
if something was deforested in Malaysia or Indonesia and now they're palm trees, and Unilever or Kraft Heinz, they procure palm oil from those regions and make a product out of it. And if they sell it in Europe, they'll have to pay huge penalties and they'll have to remove all their products, right? So I think what is coming is the fact that uh, I guess 10 years down the line, there'll be more regulations to say that this is what you can or can't do. Uh, and I guess at that point, it'll become very, very important for you to understand what is my carbon impact today, and if I can't decrease my farm, if I can't deforest more land, how do I make sure that I'm able to produce the most from what I have while being, carbon efficient? I would say carbon neutral, but while being carbon efficient. So, and that all starts with measurement and continuous measurement to see what is my carbon footprint today, and as I make changes, how is my carbon footprint changing year on year or month on month?
Ketan, it's been really great talking to you, and I'm super impressed by how much you're dedicating your life and career to addressing the climate crisis that we're in. We need more like you, and being in the School of Engineering in my entrepreneurship class, I tell them as a learning experience, all the new ventures they need to work on to practice developing have to address the climate in some way or form. And so I hope that maybe 10 years from now, some of them will come back as guests for the Germinator and share their experience in doing something along the same veins as you are. Just before I quickly say our goodbyes, I do want to come back and quickly just do a quick shout out to the next session. So a month from now, so I'm going to skip 2 weeks from now. We're going to skip one session. So it's not every 2 weeks. The next one will be a month from now, March 26th. And this would be the very last guest for the Germinator for this session of 2024-2025 academic year. I don't know if you know Andrew Maxwell from York University. But Andrew is a longtime friend, colleague, and collaborator in entrepreneurship education. He's the chair in technology of entrepreneurship at York University's BEST Labs. So that's the Bergeron Entrepreneurs in Science and Technology. And he has experience in research and practice of technology commercialization. He has a lot of things to say about tech transfer office and how universities translate innovation or intellectual property, inventions, technologies into the market and why we're so bad at it. And so we're going to talk about why technology transfer office is an oxymoron. And so he's a lovely person to talk to, and I know I'm going to learn a lot from him in this session. And so invite everybody who's watching this recording or live to join us again for the very last Germinator guest for this academic year on March 26th, 1 p.m. Pacific time. With that, I would like to thank again Ketan for reconnecting and hearing what you're up against. And since again you've switched directions about 8 months ago.
Yeah.
We should probably put a pencil in a calendar and check in a maybe 2 or 3 years and see how that's going. And if you need an excuse to come to the Okanagan to look at our farmlands, just let me know, and I'm gonna call up Jennifer and see if we can go visit her farm as well.
Anytime you can come see my little baby farm, for sure. Ketan will sneeze and he'll be already through it, but yeah.
I,
Thank you
I
very
appreciate
much.
the offer. Thank you very much. And last word is we need more scientists and we need more technologists in agriculture. I think it's a great field and we benefit a lot from it.
I'm on it. Okay.
Thank you
Have a
so
good day,
much.
everyone.
Thanks. Bye.